hey everybody, I'm Jenn Larry. Welcome to Cannabis Industry Insights. I'm here today with a fantastic panel to cover extraction, standards, compliance, and maybe some other fun things along the way. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Tess, we'll start with you because I see you first in my tile.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're calling from. My name is Tess Espejo. I am a program manager from UL Canada. I'm based off of our Toronto office. I've had decades of experience. I'm not going to tell you how many decades, but I've had decades of experience in codes and legislation development. And most recently, I was also the secretary and project manager for the International Workshop Agreement on Cannabis Facilities in Operation. That's under ISO. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about cannabis extraction and so many other fun stuff, as Jen has said. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. Phil, how about you?
Thanks, Jen. As said, my name is Phil Kwong. I am the founder of a company called 3Carbon. 3Carbon is a professional services company, and we focus and work with different licensed producers across the country, helping them set up their processing facilities and assist in their product development. And more recently, 3Carbon has also worked more closely on the health and safety side. And I've had the opportunity to work with UL and Tess on multiple projects and chair different committees like the TG 4402, and also acted as the vice convener on the ISO IWA 37 workshop.
Fantastic. Quinn?
Perfect. My name is Quinn Siskin, and my current role is Director of Products and Innovation at the Valens company. We're one of Canada's largest and most diverse extraction companies, but also CPG manufacturing company of all cannabinoid-based goods. So my background was in oil and gas, and I really was strategic in building a lot of different extraction systems at Valens. So a lot of knowledge in the ethanol and hydrocarbon and CO2 and all the different extraction types available in Canada, and very fluent in all the standards and codes and all the intricacies to have a compliant system within a highly regulated market. So looking forward to getting into this discussion.
Fantastic. And Melinda?
Hi there. I'm Melinda Amador, joining from Codenext, based in Toronto. I'm a professional engineer practicing in Alberta, BC, Ontario, and Manitoba. And we provide building code and fire code support services to architects or to owners. And we've been supporting the cannabis extraction industry for the past 3 years or so. I'm currently also the chair of the new NFPA standard 420 for cannabis growing and processing facilities. So I'm so glad to be joining you all today.
Well, it's just such a pleasure to have all of you here. You know, we've had a bit of a colorful history over the last couple of years with many other of our, industry peers. As Phil mentioned, we got to work together on some technical guides, which I think is huge. The 4402 specifically, a guideline to help, around extraction. And there's so many products in the market right now where extraction is the linchpin to really get those to shelf. And then Tess, the UL organization, was able to take that document, and I think as it continues to grow, which is that idea of global legalization, you guys were able to create a global committee really talking about how to standardize specifically extraction as it comes to this, incredibly, vibrant commodity that is cannabis. So I really think it's exciting for our audience today. Each of you come with a very specific background, whether it's technical, whether it's from a writing perspective, a consulting perspective. I've had the privilege to work in the industry over the last 5 years. I founded the Cannabis Education Guild. I also run CBD Strategy Group, and we've been consulting with all types of businesses, from technology to licensed producers, through M&A phases and product development, really just jumping in to kind of help define what will be the future of, a very compliant, safe, and exciting industry. And so let's just jump right into it. Melinda, I want to start with you. You're doing a lot these days. You're probably the closest to codes and compliance. I'd love you to just kind of get in there. There's a scope of work that happens, buildings need to be built, things need to happen. Maybe you can talk a little bit from your perspective, why the codes and the compliance space is maybe the first place to start when you're really thinking about extraction.
Great. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jen. So certainly what we see when we enter into a cannabis space or a project where someone's looking to either build out a new facility or retrofit an existing facility is that the permits and approvals from the city are going to be really critical, and that providing that basis of compliance in terms of, have you met your building code requirements for your occupancy? Does your building need to be sprinklered? Are you even allowed to be doing a higher hazard industrial activity in that building that you're considering or that you've already built? We often see some gaps. I guess we've got big ideas and great ideas for production, but whether or not it really fits or is permitted within a building that you might have already allocated for that needs to be assessed. So, building codes, we're looking at occupancy, we're looking at exits, we're looking at sprinklers. Is there, oftentimes if we've got maybe a farm or a more rural environment, do we really have sufficient water to that site to support what we need from a code standpoint? And then when we start looking at fire code, we need to understand what solvents are being used, what volumes are being used, and how that is going to flow through the building. As we've kind of all alluded to, the cannabis space moves really quickly, and there are a lot of new technologies and new materials that are constantly being tested and piloted and then, proven and used. All of those scales and all of those solvents represent different risks. And so what might work in your pilot facility may not be appropriate for a production scale when we're looking at your building infrastructure and your permits and approvals. So I think that's kind of my starting point. When we look at these spaces, we really want to understand from a feasibility level, what's the process? Does it fit? And then, we're able to kind of forecast what kind of growth might you need? How would that fit in the building? And what kinds of obstacles do we need to address or talk about with the city so that you're not ever going to be held up on your process by a permit issue?
And it makes somewhat sense when you're talking about it, of all these things that, businesses need to think about. And of course, the notion that we don't know what we don't know, I think really rings true in cannabis. You brought up the buildings, the codes, the building inspectors, the documentation, all of the things that seem very administrative. But from an execution perspective, you started to talk about solvents. So I just kind of wanted to throw it to Quinn for a second, because there's the master box, and then there's the boxes inside of the box. And for our audience, just to kind of frame it up, and what we really, I think, tried to achieve through creating the guideline was to realize that whether you're using water, whether you're using ethanol, whether you're using CO2, hydrocarbons, that each of these methodologies, each of these solvent comes with, I guess, with their own risks. So Quinn, maybe you can talk a little bit about why is it so different in cannabis? Like, you guys have so many different processes under one roof, but cannabis isn't the only thing in Canada that gets extracted. So what are your thoughts on what you need to think about in this critical go-to market strategy of actually being able to operate and keep the business safe for the employees and, of course, the end product?
It really starts, like Melinda was talking about, the pre-planning and execution of future business plans, always looking at what your scaled solution is and building out to the addressable market. So understanding, well, Melinda made a good point. You have a pilot scale, you might do a few kilos a day, but then you want a runway to do 600-700 kilos a day. That's a much different footprint and allowable limits for solvent in that building. So really pre-planning into your workspace. And also, she mentioned process flow. Understanding where your process solvent is, where your storage is, really needs to be fully identified when you're looking to get into this extraction space, because each solvent and each process has risks associated with it. You have hydrocarbon, very volatile and explosive solvent. That requires a different type of booth and different kind of lifeline systems than other operating extraction systems. but also there's CO2. CO2, we get up to 5,000 PSI. That is no joke when you're looking into a high pressure system. That has also a lot of associated risks. So you need to have proper safety systems just in case the worst case happens. Evacuation plans, safety plans, this all needs to be really worked into your starting plans when you're building out a new facility or transitioning into updating a facility to add these processes. I think the biggest thing is understanding what your end goal is and how much you want to process per day, and then working with the code experts and local jurisdictions to understand what you're allowed, what you can have in BC and what you can have in Ontario is a much different regulation code. And transparency, Jen, I think having a very transparent business plan, extraction plan, and execution plan, and bringing in the local fire chiefs, the fire codes, insurance individuals, so there's no secrets in what you're doing in your operation. As when we were building out Valens, it was very collaborative. We had great engineers, we had great fire marshals. We were not hiding any secrets of what we wanted to do in our building, as it was kind of new. There is people that in like farm and or fragrance and other kind of oil extraction and in food and nutraceuticals, they use ethanol, they use hydrocarbons, they use CO2. But extraction was a little bit different. We handle the product different. It's a lot more safe. And we want these processes all in the same building, which was unique for most fire officials and other individuals in this space to understand solvent limits and capacities. But I think now in this last few years, like Melinda and our group and Tess and Phil, we've really come together and worked on these technical guides to give guidance early on for what the hindrances are, the safety risks that are coming, and some mitigation factors to really help the planning process. As nothing worse is when you build out and you can't use your system because you're over your solvent limit. Well, that could have been mitigated way earlier in that process, as that's the stuff you need to decide on early, your final capacity, and then work kind of backwards with compliance, code experts, and your local building codes.
You know, and I think it's great, you know, both of you are highlighting the importance, I think, of planning, of starting early. And, you know, I know from a business point of view, you can really never start early enough because you really want to be massaging your plan and thinking about, you know, how it really stacks up against where the market is and the industry is. And certainly, if we look at, you know, from 2015 to present, when extraction kind of became, you know, a part of a contributor to the medical market, and now, of course, operates across both the adult use and medical product development space, we didn't know much. So, you know, Phil, I think one of the things that was interesting, you and I kind of met around a time when hydrocarbon, like the solvent wasn't even permitted in Canada. So when Quinn brings up this idea of understanding your addressable market, understanding your, you know, commercial space, maybe you could share a little bit, like, how do you know 5 years from now where you're going to go? How do you know how big of a machine to even start buying and what that looks like if you have to keep training on it, buying parts? Like, what are some of the lessons you've learned around equipment being compliant in this jurisdiction, but also it being, I guess, in a state of readiness to, you know, answer the needs of the addressable market, as I put that in quotes?
Oh man, Jen, you hit so many points right there, going all the way back into 2015, 16, 17. Expect when we first met, and it's like nothing was really legalized in terms of methodology and cannabis yet, but at the same time, everything was legalizing simultaneously. So it's like being able to plan, it's pretty hard sometimes, especially when things aren't completely outlined and clear. So it's like the best you can do is use forecasting and really focus on what your end product goal is and really coming backwards to that main point. But even back then, before hydrocarbons even got added to the permitted solvent list, there it's like we were still working in the back end along with yourself and a lot of manufacturers from the US, because what we did in Canada was we looked at the United States, and then we looked at markets like Washington and Colorado, where it was a little bit more regulated. And there was more of an example of where Canada might go, where we were getting a lot of our jurisdictions from. And basically what we started looking at and what we started encouraging was looking at the solvent limits and also the parts per million inside the actual product development. And then mimicking that from the States and then making the recommendation back to Canada. But when it comes to forecasting and planning, It's pretty hard, especially when you've got these buildings for cannabis that are so specialized, and they're not really functional in another industry per se. So when you start building out this very highly niche building, whether it's 100,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet, it doesn't really matter because everything starts taking into a toll. So like you were saying before, Jen, like how do you know which piece of equipment to buy? Well, it's like at the end of the day, what you do is you buy a piece of equipment that has the capacity to reach a certain limit. But at the same time, you want one that can be modular potentially, or one that can grow with the facility scale of what your end product goal is going to be. But then it's like when you take that machine, it's like you have to also look at the entire building, like Melinda and Quinn have been saying, because it's not just the extraction room, it's not just the equipment, it comes into everything. So even going into your storage of your pre-equip or your pre-raw material of your dried cannabis or your fresh cannabis, well, depending on the fire code and depending on the building code, you might not be able to store hundreds of kilos or pounds of cannabis inside that building. And it's like you might actually defeat your purpose before you even get started and before the cannabis actually reaches the machine. So what it really comes down to is really understanding what you can do in Canada or the different provinces, really looking at what your end goal is and where you want to be. But even in terms of equipment compliancy in Canada, I think the one thing that caught Anna off guard the most was the CRN listings and the actual compliance side. And that's because a lot of equipment that came from Europe or the US, it wasn't compliant in Canada because Canada actually has a much more rigorous and much more complicated process to get equipment into the country. And that one really threw a wrench in the wheel for most equipment manufacturers. But I think we're in a much better place than we were before.
I would definitely agree. I think we still have an exciting journey ahead of us, but certainly as we're entering 2022, I think there's a lot more that we can reflect on, a lot more we can learn from. It's a great opportunity, Tess, for you to maybe jump in. I think something that Phil's talking about is this, jurisdictions we in Canada. So much of what we're doing now was inspired by the work that was done by our, peers in the States, right? We're talking about decades of building out products, putting them into markets. And then there was this like slew that kind of came north, and all of a sudden we're at a dead stop because, as we've now learned, and maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what is CRN. All of a sudden, what do you mean equipment needs to be compliant? What do you mean there are guidelines? Whoever told us in cannabis that the fire marshal and the building inspectors were also part of our industry? So, you guys at UL, you're cross-border. Why was it so important for you to get involved with cannabis? Like, where are you feeling like you're kind of closing the gap so that we can operate with a little bit more understanding of what's true versus what just sounds, like it could be good?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question, Jen. And I very privileged to be in the company of experts and people who have had that experience, that significant experience in cannabis. Because you were just talking about planning, and we can just talking about scaling of production, and all of these are very, very significant and important for us who are in the industry. And our experience on cannabis came because of a need. So when we were, when Canada was just thinking about legalization, many stakeholders, actually, many of them regulators, many of them are building officials and fire officials, came over to our organizations because we are a standards development, certification, and inspection and testing type of an organization where many of these fall under. They came to us and asked us, what are you doing? How are you going to help us? Because as we all know, when we started legalizing cannabis, you mentioned a while ago, Jen, we don't know what we don't know. And that's what happened in cannabis. The AHJs, when they began looking at these facilities, they were looking at these warehouses that have been repurposed and equipment that have been customized from Europe or from the United States, from other types of function and operation, and they were now using them for cannabis because there's nothing that was specifically built or manufactured for the cannabis industry, because at that time it was an infant. It was not an industry yet. And so there was a need to actually come together with experts like these individuals that we have on the table to draft some rules around the facilities and operation of cannabis. And that was very, very important for all of us in Canada to be ensured that whatever we are doing in the cannabis space will be safe, not only for the property, but more especially for the people that are going to be operating under that space. So that is the reason why we got involved, because we thought, if we're not going to do it, who else is going to do it? Like, it will be against our safety mission if we're not going to start and help out in the development of those requirements. And so we did, and as we have talked about, we developed standards, we developed technical guides, and now we're going internationally. Because what we have experienced in the past 4 years here in Canada, other countries in the world are just going to be experiencing next. And the same types of experiences that we've had, they will come to realize pretty soon that they don't know anything and they would need help. And that's why we in Canada, together with the Standards Council of Canada, which is our national standards regulator, said that, okay, I think we've had enough knowledge and experience from the short time that we've been here in this space to now share that knowledge through the ISO International Workshop and ISO Technical Committee on Cannabis. And that's what we're going to do next, Jen.
Amazing. Melinda, so I just want to ask you about that because, Tess was talking about like how everybody else is kind of going to go into what we went through and we're still going through. So if it's not a linear industry, we're waking up every day. It seems like we're uncovering new risks, new hazards, new news, new barriers. What you do in the industry, how much of it is new in your opinion, and how much of it is that we haven't really sat down and tackled? The people that are trying to get into the business have not afforded themselves an opportunity to have those documents or those discussions. So what do you do in a fluid space where risk and hazard is almost like you should schedule it in for a meeting every day because there's no chance that it's not happening?
Right. Well, I think what's interesting about cannabis when we look at building and fire codes, and as we've kind of alluded to, other industries throughout Canada are using extraction. The solvents that are being used here aren't novel. There isn't anything that's really new in cannabis in relation to, fire and explosions and risks and how we build our buildings and how those spaces are regulated. What we found when we started looking at extraction facilities is that the scale is really a bit unique. So the fire code has regulations that are really fairly well developed for large scale activities, distilleries and, processing plants that are kind of a larger scale, like a, large pharmaceutical or large manufacturing. And we do have some requirements for, smaller scale, like laboratory scale, benchtop scale, but that kind of what I would call more like craft scale, that in and around, 1,000 liters of solvent to, maybe 5,000 liters of solvent, that's really not well defined in our codes. There's more interpretation. You're leaning more into your consultants and your authority to have a level of comfort with what those risks are and how to manage them appropriately. And that is a bit of a gap in our codes, or it's not as a clear cut. You can't flip to a page and say, this is how you have to design every single space. So when we have that element of our codes, in addition to kind of the fluidity that we see in cannabis specifically, where one solvent might be really, really the driving force 1 year, and 6 months later we want to try a new solvent, or now we're ready to scale up, or we want to add this new component. Those two factors, kind of the variability or the fluidity of the needs of the industry, and operating in a bit of an interpretive gray space in the codes, means that you're not necessarily going to get consistent answers from your authorities or your consultants, and that you're constantly going back for answers. So you're kind of in this iterative loop of asking for direction and black and white in a space where we don't have black and white. So these new guidelines and these new standards that are being prepared, and the groups that are coming together to help provide that guidance, I think are really critical, because while we have codes and these solvents aren't new and extraction isn't necessarily new, it's really the pace that we see in cannabis kind of can be more challenging, especially if you don't have authorities that have a level of comfort with those risks. And also because our code cycle is slow comparatively. And maybe that's something we could talk about after that Tess could speak to.
Yeah, you know what, you bring up some obviously continuously valid points and things to consider. It as an audience, you know, it still might seem a little confusing. It seems like people, like they always are, a critical part of this, right? Process validation, training. Quinn, I'm going right to you. You're sitting on this panel for a billion reasons, but you know, you're an operator in Canada. Where your business or the business you work for started all those years ago, and that, to use the word, because it wouldn't be a panel if we didn't, to pivot and then find yourselves as a toll processor, like putting the people part in it. How did your organization do it right every time, or did you? Are you guys still learning the way, you know, and how do you take this kind of fluid approach to training, ensuring safety of people, actually taking those decisions and rethinking about how to, you know, not only keep those people safe, but to make sure that at the end of the day, it could be monetized, because we are here for a very practical and scalable business. So just wondering your thoughts on that, of how you guys are managing the risk and hazards, and you know, what's shining for you these days as the core areas to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So extraction, I find, is a constant evolution, even in CPG manufacturing or just extraction. Constant improvement in safety, throughput, yields, all that stuff really matters. So training is an ongoing basis with us, and we put a lot of effort into training our employees on each kind of systems. And we have kind of tiered system through our employees that they train and get validated on systems and slowly grow with the company, learn to operate many different areas. But it's very strategic to do validations. So doing process validations to install, to product running placements, to the actual running live product, to process validations is very key. But cleaning validations is a missed one in there as well. So how you operate the system, how you clean it, but also how you have your constant training. So we have a lot of new employees. We have new staff coming on for different shifts. So we do like an extended 30-day, 60-day, 90-day kind of process, and get them to duly sign off on some sheets so they're fully comfortable understanding all the risks, how that solvent operates, how the high pressure works, so they can feel confident they know how to operate the systems, but also feel confident if there ever is an issue or a problem, how to mitigate the risk and how to keep themselves safe during a time of crisis. So it's a lot of preventative training and preventative maintenance programs is a really another key factor when we go into this constant evolution. Extraction is a high pressure, lots of solvents, so lots of factors could degrade systems. They can eat out some your gaskets or your valves. So preventative maintenance is another really big one that we focused a lot of energy towards at Valens. So all our systems are maintained on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, to get their change out parts, to understand that they're operating at the right parameters and specifications. So you have that consistency of product, but also consistency in safety. We've seen a change, like you're saying, how fast the evolution of cannabis is happening. We've seen this. When we started, we were looking at cultivation assets about 5 years ago. We saw the need for extraction, so we went after it full steam ahead. And we liked having the different extraction methods. So we have different resin outputs for each one of our end products we want to manufacture. So we CO2 extraction, we can put this into vapes or other products. Hydrocarbon, we have specific products we like to use that for concentrates and other derivatives. And then there's ethanol, which we use high capacity, low cost production for THC or CBD products and distillates or full spectrum resin. So there is a need and a niche market for each extraction system of how it derives value from the plant and how it relates into a finished product. There's a lot to consider when you're looking at what extraction method's best, as they all have a unique platform, risk associated, value points associated with them. So really understanding what your target goal as a new company or an adapting company to get into the extraction space, like we keep getting back to, early on planning for your future success is definitely a need.
Well, you know, as someone who's also had a chance to work in the industry to develop product, it has been an eye-opener for me. I thought I knew a bit about extraction, but I think something I didn't learn enough along the way was the importance of the biomass. I know we always talk about quality in, quality out, but sometimes these words are just, what is quality? How do you start defining that? And so I know today's panel is about extraction and it's not about cultivation and growing, but I do want to bring it to the point because the thing that makes cannabis so incredibly cool is stuff like diamonds and sauce and shatter and all of these things that were underground and almost seemed radical to consume, but I like to call it like pure play cannabis versus this, vat of oil that you're going to use then to make, a packaged good. So I don't know who wants to kind of take that, but I do want to share with the audience a little bit. You can have all the dreams you want. You can build the greatest hydrocarbon facility. And you go out and you get your clients and they show up with this. And how does that throw them off? So guys, maybe you can share, Phil, Quinn, I don't know if you're in it. What do we need to think about when you're getting the biomass of how that's going to work with extraction? Specifically, if anybody has an insight where hemp and outdoor is playing a bit of a role in any different way versus something that may have been cultivated in an inside environment.
I can touch on this one first, Jen, as biomass is definitely very important when you're selecting into all products or extraction methods. Understanding your cultivation practices is so important as what is in that cannabis. Is it pesticides? Is there heavy metals? Is there other hazards that could be in that plant that you extract, compound into your extract, and then it's a poor extract at that point. So understanding your cultivation practices when you're in extraction is very important. What your farmer put on it in outdoor, what neighboring farms around that. We've seen a lot of crops get hot with pesticides from crops that were miles or a couple miles down the road, getting overspray onto all the crops and infecting all their hemp and their outdoor cannabis. So it's very important. You need to know what your farmer's doing or your cultivation partner's doing, but there's also different grades of cannabis. Not all cannabis makes every product. You can have outdoor, trim, lower grade product. We look at that as driving value for a low cost, plain old THC distillate or CBD distillate or isolates, where you're just going to have as big mass to turn into as lowest cost for your edibles or that. But then there's a whole other side, craft and high quality cannabis or fresh frozen cannabis. These are the premium side of things where you really have that science and that art really come together to make these different concentrates, like you're talking about the live resin, the diamonds and the dabs. So it's really important to have a balance of legacy know-how, guys that know and understand what great cannabis products are, but also have tremendous science and engineering partners and blend them together, because you need to blend of both, because you can buy all these equipments. I'm not sure how many tours I've given at Valens and people ask, well, just go buy this extraction system. Well, I always use that analogy. You can just go buy an oven or a stove from a store, but you're not going to be a gold star medallion chef. There's a bunch of differences in there. Safety is going to be good. Your compliance is good. You got the best equipment, but you really need to have a passionate staff of legacy guys that really love cannabis and have a passion for the plant, backed by science and experts that really want to do stuff proper. Safety, consistency, quality every time is very, very important to understand. Biomass in your extraction methods, which one's best, and have that finished product. They all kind of in that kind of complete supply chain is really important to pair them all together.
Phil, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. No, Quinn hit it right on the nail really well there. And just kind of leading off to what he was saying and kind of addressing these products like you're talking about, Jen, like the diamonds and the sauce. A lot of these products, especially in Canada, they were so large in the illegal market and on the illicit side, where more recently we're starting to see a demand and a request for these products to come on the legal side. So it's like, kind of like Quinn was saying, is having that team of passionate individuals from individuals that actually have that skill set to create those products, but also having your science team and your Q&A teams to ensure the validation. It's an interesting collaboration and one that I've kind of really enjoyed watching and being a part of. Because for someone like myself that actually came from the illegal industry and was part of the prohibition side and then kind of converted over, it's interesting to see how you can actually take that knowledge and that know-how from an illegal side where there is no regulations, there is no standards, there's no nothing. A lot of it was happening in a garage per se, which is not an ideal situation. But then getting the opportunity to come into the legal industry and work with companies like Valens and work with organizations like UL who are interested in having the aspects and opinions of everybody coming towards them, and then take that and look at how do you make it into the best possible product. So I think it's pretty interesting to see if like how equipment manufacturers kind of alongside pivot as well, because we're looking at a lot of these products with how they made, like the diamonds and the sauces. Well, it's like, unfortunately, in the legal industry, we don't get to put that in a mason jar and put it in an oven and see what happens next. It's like we actually need to use stainless steel vessels and use different pieces of equipment and pressurized pressure gauges and whatnot to actually see what we're doing next. So I think in terms of actually these products, and it's an interesting collaboration from individuals that have had this industry experience from, say, a different part in the industry, whether it was legal or not, but then come transition over and had the opportunity to work with companies like Valens or other ones or organizations like UL and create that standard and create that technical guide know-how to kind of lead individuals to that next step. Because like Quinn was saying, just because you buy an extraction machine doesn't mean you're going to make those products. It's no different than if you buy a stove doesn't make you a chef. So I think interesting perspective. Sure.
Great. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Melinda, I don't know if you want to add something to that from your side.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, from a building and fire code standpoint, we've had the opportunity to work more on the legal side of the business. And as these businesses are developing and growing and, learning those lessons, and the opportunities to work with Tess and the standards writing organizations to kind of help, as Phil was saying, kind of guide the industry and support the industry in making this move and, and expanding in the built environment. One of the things that we've encountered a lot of and that we've been supporting as much as possible is kind of education initiatives with the local authorities. So whether or not it's, doing presentations or getting involved in meetings more with the authorities, because the industry is keen, right? The investors are keen, and it's making sure that the authorities have the information that they need to feel informed in their judgments to make sure that these spaces are meeting all of the obligations that they're responsible for enforcing. So I think education's a big part of that. And I think these standards that are being written and the different organizations like Quinn and Phil in terms of, engaging with the local stakeholders and authorities is really critical.
And Tess, I just, maybe you want to, add some of your thoughts again. There's so much that's going on because, there's stigma still.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about something. When we talk about cannabis, it already, is still more radical than it needs to be. Certainly when extraction comes up, because it has not necessarily been normalized from a distribution perspective. We don't have those classic channels that you can just walk in and go buy everything. So, I want our audience to really take away that taking an extraction decision, mm-hmm. from a business perspective, it's also, it's understanding available biomass, it's understanding partners, it's understanding market share and potential and operating. So with all of this, maybe you do want to touch on something that Melinda brought up. Why aren't the codes being built faster? Why does it take so long? And how, and I say it with a smile, obviously, because, obviously things take time, but as we have the audience listening today, they need to start. So are they starting on documents that are kind of living, breathing, that they're constantly moving? When are the codes going to be in a place where everyone could say, excellent, now I know exactly how to operate?
Thank you very much for that, Jen, but actually I don't want to thank you because that's a very complicated question and it will take us a whole day to just explain the code process. But just to make it quick without lambasting or whatever, or criticizing our code process, because it's a very, very good process. And we're making sure that it is a consensus process, it's a democratic process, and we have a whole balance of stakeholder interests that are heard of and listened to during the code process. But the code development process in Canada is a national model code process, an objective-based code as well, which means that they're all at a very high level of requirements that are implemented, that are developed at the national level and implemented at the local level. And so even if the national code development process takes 5 years for every iteration, as Melinda said, even if it is 5 years, it also actually takes more than 10 years just to change an article in the code, because like now, as we speak at 2022, most of the revisions proposals that are submitted to NRC, which is the National Research Council that administers the code, will no longer make it to the 2025 edition of the National Building or Fire Code, because it's too late. So the ones that I'm in the National Building Code Standing Committee, the revision proposals that we are discussing now have been submitted more than 5 years ago. So it is a very slow process. But having said that, the code is one layer and the standards is another layer. So for us here, Phil, Quinn, and Melinda, we felt that the standards development process is something that we can control more, and we are able to move that much quicker than codes. So even if standards that we've developed now are voluntary in nature and they will not be mandated in the local jurisdictions unless they are adopted, we at least give people guidance on how you can, develop, build your facility and use the equipment that will be safe, extraction equipment, and the methodology of extraction and the process for doing that safely. At least we were able to craft standards requirements and technical guides on how you can do that properly. And again, the industry can voluntarily adopt those standards and guides for their own safety, and the AHJs, the regulators, are also using those documents on a voluntary basis until they are adopted in more formally into our codes and regulations. And so that is the same for other types of industry. And I just wanted to touch on the process for cannabis, because the unique thing about cannabis, and Phil mentioned this a while ago, is that this industry is coming from an illicit state into a legal state. And so many of the activities that were done previously when it was still illegal were now being rediscovered in this legal framework. And we're very lucky and fortunate that Phil Kwong decided to lend us their expertise based on their previous experiences. But the AHJs didn't know anything about the process and the facilities and the operation of these, on how the cannabis product was being produced and processed, and that is why they needed to be educated. And Melinda talked about that a while ago. And the other thing about this is the cannabis industry is also very fast-paced industry. We were just talking about the biomass, and at this. Even as we speak now, technologies are still evolving and the processes are still being improved. There's still a lot of things that we don't know, and we are in the very early stages of this industry. And yet, we in Canada are considered the experts. And so I think there is an opportunity and a challenge for us to continue the conversation, to continue to think of ways and means on how we can improve not just the process of extraction, but the equipment that we're using, and the facilities that we are building, in ensuring that we are meeting safety, security, sustainability, as well as developing the best product for the clients and the customers.
I think your answer was amazing. And, I really do want to make sure that the audience really identifies the difference between a standard and a guideline. I think that was a huge win in the way that the UL kind of brought us all together and approaching. And so, of course, I don't know if you guys want to share whether it's in the chat box or, I know all of you are very approachable and everybody can ask you like, what are the best guidelines and codes to kind of know and start with. But, this is the exciting time. There is nothing perfect, but there is a better practice versus, just a haphazard practice. And I know everybody wants to get to the finish line. If I put on my commercial hat, 2022, is going to be a great time in cannabis, but we're going to continue to see a lot of M&A, a lot of consolidation. We're going to see a price gouge that's happening in the market. And those things impact extraction, I would say, as much as it impacts, with the, influx in pricing from the pandemic, and we're going to see against packaging and shipping and all of that, the cost of $1 million machine doesn't change. And if you can only make 1,000 vapes at the end of the day, or you're now, the products that you want to make, you can make less of them because of price positioning or market share. It's really important, I guess, for people getting involved to realize there's no magic bullet, but really thinking out, going back to the beginning, planning. Where are you going to be 3 to 5 years from now? And knowing that we don't know where the industry is necessarily going to be. And we don't even know if the Cannabis Act will be adjusted to allow major players who have established manufacturer and supply chain organizations to kind of get into the game with different licenses. Lots to talk about. I'm sure we can go on for a while. I just wondered, I know we've spoken a lot about what to think about, I guess, if you're getting into business, to know there's different type of solvents and codes and whatnot. Investors are constantly looking. Now we have boxes, as Phil said, that were built, purpose built, right? So what else are they going to be used for? I was wondering if anybody just wanted to throw out a thought before we go to audience questions on, if you're an investor, if somebody's coming to you now with a presentation to invest in an extraction facility in Canada, is there any tip that we could give them to help them kind of know what should you be looking for when it comes to a good investment around all the things that you guys have shared today with our audience?
I can touch on that quick. First is a good investment in extraction is everyone's talked about extraction, everyone's talked about cultivation, but understanding a sound business plan with a sales execution on the back end is going to be very important. We can buy machines, we can set them up into a facility. Okay, we have the personnel, but now how do we move the product into a commercial, regulated recreation channel, medical channel, or B2B kind of bulk sales? And investing into extraction there's quite a few companies in Canada, but now there's, like you said, there's M&A coming in, there's a few dropping off. So really focusing on a company that's got the core capabilities, that's compliant, has everything operational. You can see a plan for future growth and success because the building's built right. Then also have the team behind it's going to be the next thing of, can they actually operate, and can they actually move product into these relatable sales trends of vapes or concentrates or this, and have that product roadway and that runway to be able to execute it. We see that at Valens is we started with extraction, we started doing just B2B, we're doing toll processing, but now we've evolved into having consumer facing brands, and using that extraction platform to drive value and turn it into finished goods is really kind of where we pivoted, and it's going to be a strong model. You'll see others kind of follow suit.
And Melinda, I'm just wondering your thoughts on this as well. So let's put a scenario out there. The box is being built, right? It's a very particular situation in Canada to get licensed. You're building the box, you're going out, you're soliciting for funds. You've really educated us today, on who you play with on a day-to-day. If I'm an investor and the box hasn't operated yet, what are some critical things that I need to be looking at from a compliance perspective to know if this business even will get the permit or licensed?
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that. So when we're looking at, if we're looking at a facility, if we're looking at a building, and a plan for how that space is going to be used, I think, as Quinn said, in terms of planning, it's really critical to understand, you may operate on day one and everything's smooth and everything's exactly where it's supposed to be, and all of your volumes are right, and your growth, your the solvents that you need and the equipment's all there. But what we often encounter from a code standpoint is that it's compliant on day one, but we don't know if it's compliant a week later or a month later or 5 years later. And that investment in that building can become, devalued pretty quickly if you're not maintaining your systems, if you're not maintaining your compliance with the fire codes, and if you start to operate outside of your allowances. Those things become really important to understand. And, day one compliance does not necessarily equal compliance 5 years down the road. And that the team that is managing that space really needs to respect and understand those responsibilities.
Amazing. Phil, I don't know if you want to throw anything in there. We talked about CRN. I don't know if everybody knows what it is, but now let's just kind of maybe get into the equipment for 1 second, because there's a lot of trade shows that are happening. There's a lot of people that are going to be on the floor. So, is there anything that you would say to, and I'm using investors specifically because I think we are all stakeholders, and Tess, you use the word, and there's a lot of reasons to kind of invest in the business. But right now, there is an influx of cash that is required to take the business to the next level. And it's really important, I think, that as we move forward in the next 5 years, the right businesses win. The ones that are compliant, the ones that are pushing forward the notion of standards. And so, what would you say to someone who's like looking at this, Phil, where do they start? Like, to even know if the equipment or the methodology of choice is something that could be sustained and is compliant once the door opens?
No, great question. And Jen, and we've said it many times over and over in this industry, there's no shortcuts. And that's just the biggest thing about this entire industry. And kind of touching based off of what everyone's saying, and to your questions, Jen, where do you start? And it's like, where do you start can be so many open-ended answers and questions, to be fair. But it's just focusing on the equipment side, because you brought it up in the CRN. That is one of the biggest things that I continue to see over and over and over keep coming up, even today. I even had a client actually call me and ask me if they even needed a CRN listing to operate in the province of BC. And basically what a CRN listing is it stands for Canadian Registered Number. And it is a number, and it is a listing within the government or within the country of Canada that pertains to equipment that is considered a boiler, pressure, or a vessel. And basically what that means is that this piece of equipment had to go through many different positions of compliance, whether that was where the stainless steel was actually fabricated, did it come from an ISO 9000 fabricator, what were the weldings like, what are the drawings like. It comes down to everything from the actual peer review to how that equipment actually flows, the process piping, the actual valves, everything of how that machine works. So it's right now, it's a pretty heavy investment to get into Canada as a manufacturer that's not from here, or even from a domestic manufacturer. And the simplest thing to do, whether you're taking over a facility that has equipment or looking at buying new equipment, is just ask for the CRN certificate for that province. Every single province has their own designated pressure organization that deals with the CRN listings within the country. All you have to do is ask for the actual certificate for not only the machine, but also the cylinders as well that the solvent's stored in. And it's at that point, it's you can find out pretty quick what a manufacturer is being transparent about. But other than that, is the biggest thing for investors going into the industry at this point, when a new project comes across your desk, is really look at the people. And as they really look at that team and their track record, and if they actually have a viable understanding of what it takes to go from A to Z, and if they have the ability to deal with any road bumps or any blocks that come up in their way. Because without that right team of people, it's really difficult to operate and pivot in this industry.
I couldn't agree more. Tess, anything on your side that I know because you're building more of the codes, maybe you just want to speak to how do people access stuff, whether it's from the UL or other organizations? How would a person know what type of, document or question or department to even start with?
That's a very good question, Jen. So since we all operate under the Standards Council of Canada, all the standards and guides that we at UL, being an accredited standards development organization, are all accessible and available through the Standards Council of Canada library or store. But of course, there are other stores like UL also since we have our own publication, they are also available under the UL stores. But the international standards or international workshop agreements that we have just published recently, or ISO will publish soon, and all of these people on the table have of course participated in that. These are international workshop agreements on the safety of cannabis facilities operations and extraction methods, which is ISO IWA 37-1. And then ISO IWA 37-2 pertains to the secure handling of cannabis products. And the ISO IWA 37-3 is a good production practices guide on cannabis. These are three important documents that are now going to be published by ISO under their brand. They will be available soon on the ISO store or database. And they are important documents for what we're talking about today on the extraction facilities, the facilities and the extraction equipment and operations. 37-1 address all of that, and so it will be an excellent document and a guidance document for everyone who is interested in going into this business and to understand what are required for the process that they are desiring to develop for their business, and that will give them some guidance on how to build their facilities as well. But as has been talked about today, the people are important, not just the team that is going to be operating your facility, but also the external people like the consultants and all the other people who can provide you with the information, who are experts in the industry. The people here are for me, the best of the best, the creme de la creme. So I'm not selling their services, but if you are looking for experts in the field in cannabis, well, as I told you time and time again, you can only find them in Canada, because Canada has the most mature cannabis industry in all the world. So the people here around the table in front of me are the experts in the world. That's all I can say.
Well, I am just so delighted that you were able to rhyme off so many different documents. I think that's a testament to the work that's gone in to designing and defining an industry that we are just all so very excited about for a variety of reasons. Phil, you said it earlier, the TG 4402, that was something that we collectively worked on. It has a great reference in the back of it also. You know, you can go down a rabbit hole once you start kind of figuring out where you need to go. But, you know, as we come to an end today, I know we can talk about so many things when it comes to extraction, but I am so happy that we were able to take this hour and talk about the most important. If we really wanted to protect the citizens, if we want to ensure great product on the shelf, if we want to be examples for ourselves of what can happen in your lifetime when a war on drugs is won, and by the people who thought it should have never been, this is it. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for your ongoing contribution to create compliance and standards in our industry. We had a question from the audience. Can I reach out? Can I get contact information for the panelists? Absolutely. I'm not sure if Cannabis is going to give that, but I would welcome each of our panelists if you want to drop it in the chat. If you have an email or some way, that's great. And of course, if there's other questions, don't be shy. But really, I think the biggest thing is to note that extraction should not be taken lightly. We very quickly over the last, almost 4 years of adult use legalization have seen an immense shift from, a 70% market share in dried flower to, one that is now becoming a smaller piece of the pie because the maturity of extraction and the opportunity for product innovation continues to push this part of the business. So any last thoughts from anyone on our panel?
If I may, Jen, I mentioned a while ago that we are in a very, even if the Canadian cannabis industry is the most mature in the world, we are still in the very, very early stages of developing the requirements for a safe, secure, and sustainable cannabis industry. And our next activity is to develop international standards on cannabis that is going to be led by Canada, and that will be administered by UL Canada. I would encourage everyone who have the expertise and the knowledge and want to share it to the world to come forward and help out in the development of the requirements, just like Phil and Quinn and Melinda and yourself, Jen, have done in our past activities. And I think this international forum for the International Technical Committee on Cannabis will be an excellent, place to also not just to share our knowledge and experience, but also to network with other players in the world about how they're doing, what their needs are, and how we can address and help out in those needs. Thank you.
Well, the only thing left to say is thank you to Cannabis for trusting us with this discussion, and we wish everybody a great day. Keep learning about extraction.